In 2009, a fictional monster was born on a dark corner of the internet. By 2014, that monster had convinced two 12-year-old children that its existence demanded a sacrifice. This is not about a physical threat. This is about belief or delusion so powerful it led to a devastating act. We are analyzing the Waukesha incident, a true crime case that reveals the frightening power of digital folklore. The verdict of the court officially acknowledged the truth far scarier than any fictional story. The lore itself was the weapon. Welcome to Beyond Horror Explained. In Waukesha, Wisconsin, an unimaginable crime occurred. Two young girls committed an act of violence against their friend, stating they were motivated by a figure known as Slender Man. Their goal? To become his proxies and protect their families from the monster they believed was real. This case isn't just a shocking true crime story. It's a chilling case study on the intersection of mental health, internet culture, and the law. How does a story, something we all know is make-believe, become a command? Today, I'm going to show you 3 psychological and legal components of this case that explain how a horror story crossed the boundary into deadly reality. We will analyze the lore's rules, the official court diagnosis that changed everything, and the victim's own powerful statement on the motivall without showing a single graphic image of the crime itself. We are focusing on the why and the how to understand the real-world impact of digital myths. Stay with me because the documented evidence is far more disturbing than the fiction that inspired it. By the end of this, you'll see how the legal system itself confirmed the terrifying power of this digital ghost story. So, let's start with the lore itself. For most people, Slender Man was a creepypasta, a campfire story for the digital age. He was a tall, faceless figure in a suit who stalked children in the woods. But for the two girls in Waukesha, the story came with a very specific and very demanding set of rules. Their online research and personal diaries, which later became key evidence, showed they weren't just fans of the story. They were adherents to a belief system. The core of this belief was the concept of becoming a proxy, to serve Slender Man, to live with him in his mansion deep in the Nicolet National Forest, and to protect their own families from his wrath. They believed they had to prove their loyalty. And how do you prove your loyalty to a creature born from horror stories? The answer they arrived at was simple and horrifying. You had to take a life. The lore, as they interpreted it, wasn't a suggestion. It was a mandatory set of instructions. Their diaries and online communications, which were meticulously examined by investigators, painted a picture of an intense, shared obsession. They didn't see Slender Man as a game or a spooky character. They saw him as a dictator whose rules required a sacrifice. This belief wasn't casual. It was a structured, all-consuming worldview. They planned the act for months, discussing methods, timing, and how they would escape to his mansion afterward. This wasn't just two kids getting carried away. This was a descent into a shared delusion where the lines between the fictional world and their own had completely dissolved. This deep-seated belief system is what the court would later define as a severe psychological break from reality, making the lore itself an active agent in the tragedy. This brings us to the second and arguably most critical component, the legal and psychological verdict. When this case went to court, the question wasn't just what happened, but why did it happen? The defense didn't argue that the girls hadn't committed the act. Instead, they argued that the girls were not criminally responsible for their actions because they genuinely could not tell right from wrong at the time. This is where the story pivots from a simple crime to a profound psychological case study. The key legal turning point was the diagnosis of early-onset childhood schizophrenia for one of the perpetrators. This wasn't a guess or a theory, it was a medical diagnosis from multiple experts. This is the official evidence that proved their belief in Slender Man was not just an overactive imagination. It was a genuine, life-altering delusion, a symptom of a severe mental illness. For this girl, Slender Man wasn't a story. He was a real entity who spoke to her, threatened her family, and commanded her to do things. The other girl was diagnosed with a shared delusional disorder, meaning she had absorbed and adopted the schizophrenic delusions of her friend. As a result, both girls were ultimately judged not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. This is a critical legal finding that is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean they were let off. It means the court officially recognized that their mental state, fueled by the digital horror they consumed and their underlying illnesses, stripped them of the ability to understand their actions were legally and morally wrong. The conviction rested on the state of their minds, not just the act itself. The law acknowledged that the delusion was so powerful, so complete, that it overrode their sense of reality. The monster in their heads was, in the eyes of the court, the true culprit behind their actions. They were then committed to state mental health facilities for treatment, not prison for punishment, with sentences that could last for decades. This verdict is the most powerful proof we have that the horror story had, for them, become completely real. Finally, we arrive at the conclusion, which is anchored by the resilience of the victim and the undeniable proof of the motive. The true triumph of this story is not in the analysis of the crime, but in the incredible strength of the survivor. After the attack, she managed to crawl out of the woods to a nearby path where a cyclist found her. Her will to live was nothing short of miraculous. Though the act itself was devastating, she survived and has gone on to display unbelievable strength and courage in her recovery. But it was in that moment, when she was found, barely able to speak, that the final piece of this psychological puzzle locked into place. Her statement to the cyclist who saved her life cemented the motive beyond any doubt. When asked who did this to her, she identified her friends. When asked why, her answer was chillingly simple. They wanted to please Slender Man. This powerful, undeniable quote, coming directly from the victim at the moment of her rescue, is the final, irrefutable evidence. It confirms that this wasn't about anger or a schoolyard fight. It was about appeasing a digital monster that had become terrifyingly real in the minds of her attackers. The story wasn't just a backstory, it was the active, driving force behind the entire event. We've seen how the lore provided the instructions, how a diagnosed mental illness turned that lore into a command, and how the victim's own words confirmed the motive. The horror community must reckon with the real-world impact of shared digital myths, especially on vulnerable minds. The Waukesha incident serves as a tragic but vital lesson. This is beyond horror explained. Now, the full documented truth behind the psychological horror of this case. Tell me in the comments, does this case change how you view creepypasta and online folklore? Like this video if you found this analysis valuable, and subscribe to Beyond Horror Explained for more deep dives into the stories that blur the line between fiction and reality. Thank you for watching.